I was standing in the middle of an empty living room, 12 floors above downtown, sunlight pouring in through floor-to-ceiling windows, when I heard my husband calmly discuss getting rid of me in a language he was sure I didn't understand. Esta es perfecta, de verdad, Nick said to the realtor, his tone light as he swept his hand toward the sleek, modern space. Perfecta para cuando me deshaga de ella. This one is perfect for when I get rid of her. Camila Rivera, the realtor showing us properties that morning, smiled with professional politeness and made a note on the tablet in her leather portfolio. She was petite, somewhere in her 30s, dark hair in a smooth bun, red blazer sharp against her tan skin. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second, assessing, checking whether I had caught even a syllable. I kept my face soft, pleasant, interested in the view. I had been keeping my face that way for 15 years. Nick moved toward the open kitchen, running his fingers along the waterfall edge of the granite island like he already owned it. La otra ya conoce este lugar, he added casually. Le va a encantar. The other one already knows about this place. She'll love it. The other one, not a name, not a person, just a shadow waiting in the wings while I played the role of the billionaire's perfectly composed wife. My stomach knotted so tightly it hurt, but my expression didn't change. I took a few steps toward the windows, heels silent on the pale wood floor, and stared out over the city. My reflection floated faintly in the glass. A 42-year-old woman in a beige sheath dress, hair smoothed back in the way he liked, a slender gold necklace he'd chosen last Christmas because it doesn't scream for attention. That was how Nicholas Davenport preferred me. Not screaming, not demanding, not seen. Su esposa no entiende español, ¿verdad? Camila asked quietly, still in Spanish, her voice dipping lower as she took in my neutral face. Para nada, Nick laughed. Tomó francés en la escuela. Idioma inútil. Ni una palabra de español. Not at all. Took French in school. Useless language. Not a word of Spanish. If my grandmother had heard him say that, she would have chased him out of the house with her chancla in one hand and a wooden spoon in the other. Abuela Lucia had been the one to teach me Spanish during long, sticky summers in San Antonio. Sitting at her tiny kitchen table with the fan rattling overhead, drilling verbs and slapping my hand lightly when I mixed up tenses. But Nick had never asked much about my childhood, let alone my grandmother. He knew I had some Mexican roots on my mother's side. That was the beginning and end of his curiosity. Camila's gaze slid back to him. Y cuando firmen los papeles del fideicomiso modificado, todo será tuyo, she murmured. No voy a poder reclamar nada. And when you sign the modified trust papers, everything will be yours. She won't be able to claim anything. Modified trust. Fideicomiso modificado. The words landed like ice water poured down my spine. My hands trembled so slightly I doubted anyone else could see it, so I clasped them behind my back and pretended to admire the skyline. We had set up a trust 5 years ago. Standard estate planning, according to the expensive attorney Nick had brought into our living room. I had signed where he pointed, trusting him, trusting us. I hadn't asked many questions. Back then, I still believed that being married to a self-made billionaire meant we were on the same team. Dos semanas, Nick replied in Spanish, his voice smooth. En dos semanas, todo estará listo. 2 weeks. 2 weeks until what? Until he filed for divorce. Until whatever modified trust paperwork went through and quietly erased me from the empire I had watched him build from the sidelines for a decade and a half. This space has beautiful light, I said in English, my voice calm, almost bored, as I turned away from the glass. And the kitchen is stunning. Nick crossed the room in 3 easy strides, slipping an arm around my waist. To anyone watching, it would have looked affectionate, protective. To me, it felt like a hand closing around property. I think it's too modern for us, honey, he said, dismissing my comment with a light chuckle. Let's keep looking. But he had just told Camila it was perfect. Perfect for his next life. His life without me. Hay tres dormitorios, Camila added briskly, switching into English for my supposed benefit. The master suite has a walk-in closet and ensuite bathroom. Would you like to see it? Yes, please, I answered, because the Elena Davenport Nick knew would never make a scene in front of a realtor. We walked down a short hallway, Nick already distracted by the buzz of his phone. Lately, he was always distracted, Late nights at the office, last-minute flights to meet investors, weekends swallowed by retreats and conferences. A wife becomes background noise when the world has decided her husband is a genius. The master bedroom was painted a soft gray that designer blogs called oyster. I could see him here with someone else. Someone younger, probably. Someone who laughed at all his stories like she hadn't heard them 100 times, who didn't yet know how his charm curdled when you disagreed with him. El closet es amplio, Camilla said, opening double doors to reveal a generous walk-in. Muy cómodo para dos personas. The closet is spacious, very comfortable for two people, she added in English. Perfecto para sus cosas, Nick muttered in Spanish, lips barely moving. Aunque ella no tiene muchas. Perfect for her things. Not that she has many. That cut deeper than I wanted it to. And he was right in a way. I didn't have much anymore. Piece by piece, he had trimmed my life down to something neat and manageable. Friends who were too dramatic had faded away after enough raised eyebrows and snide comments. Hobbies that took time away from his schedule were impractical. Opinions that didn't align with his were cute, but misinformed. Even my wardrobe had slowly turned into a row of beige navy black, tones that whispered instead of spoke. I stepped into the empty closet and ran my fingers along the smooth, unused shelves. This space already smelled like someone else's future. It just wasn't mine. "What do you think, Elena?" Nick asked from the doorway. I turned. In the soft bedroom light, he looked every inch the man the business magazines worshipped. Navy suit tailored to perfection, pale blue shirt open at the collar, blonde hair swept back like he was permanently walking away from a wind machine. At 45, Nicholas Davenport still looked like the poster boy for America's favorite self-made billionaire. "It's nice," I said. "Just nice." His brows lifted, the way they did when a junior executive disappointed him in a boardroom. I could have told him that he had just described me as disposable in my grandmother's language. I could have told him that his other one had already been here, had already walked through this closet in her too tight dress and too high heels while I was at home, planning his schedule and stocking his pantry. But saying any of that would not have saved me. It would only have sped up whatever he was planning. "I mean, it's lovely," I corrected with a quick smile. "Very modern." "Y también tiene balcón con vista a la ciudad," Camila interjected diplomatically. "There is also a balcony with a city view." We went back through the living room to a glass door that opened onto a narrow balcony. March wind tugged at my hair as I stepped outside. The city spread below us. People, cars, lives moving forward while mine quietly came undone. "Dos semanas," Nick repeated behind me, his voice low, careless. 2 weeks. My hands tightened on the railing until my knuckles whitened. For a moment, vertigo rolled through me, not from the height, but from the magnitude of what I had just learned. 15 years of marriage reduced to a timeline for disposal. Or maybe it wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was my first clean beginning. Because there was one crucial thing my brilliant, ruthless husband did not know. He didn't know that I understood every single word he had just said, every cruel aside, every plan, every secret. He still pictured me as the 27-year-old girl he'd met at a charity gala. The one in the thrift store dress she'd pretended was vintage, dazzled by his attention and flattered by his money. The girl who believed love meant trusting blindly and surrendering completely. But I was also the granddaughter of a woman who had walked away from an abusive marriage in the middle of the night with 3 kids and a duffel bag of clothes, who had scrubbed floors and washed dishes and built a life out of scraps. Abuela taught me more than verb conjugations and idioms. She taught me that staying small doesn't keep you safe. It just makes you easier to erase. I turned away from the railing and smiled at Nick, the way I always did. "Should we see the other bedrooms?" "Sí, por supuesto," Camila said, gesturing down another hallway. While Nick pretended to be mildly interested in square footage, I walked through the rest of the condo with a different kind of focus. Not on the finishes or the layout, on time, on steps, on what I could do with 2 weeks. By the time we rode the elevator back down to the lobby, I had stopped shaking. The fear hadn't disappeared, but it had been joined by something sharper, colder, far more useful. Resolve. Camilla handed Nick her card as we stepped out into the marble lobby. "Call me when you're ready to make an offer," she said in English. "I will," he replied smoothly, then added in Spanish, pronto, muy pronto, very soon. The elevator doors closed behind us with a soft hiss. As we drove out of the underground garage, the Mercedes felt like a pressurized capsule. Nick tapped a rhythm on the steering wheel, checking his phone at every red light. That last place was interesting, he said as we merged into traffic. But 3 bedrooms is a bit small for entertaining. Don't you think? Entertaining who? Her? Whatever you think is best, I answered automatically. He smiled in that absent way he had developed over the years. That's my girl. Always easy. My girl, like a pet. Well-trained, low maintenance, predictable. I turned my face toward the window so he wouldn't see the flash of fury there. Outside, the city moved on. People buying groceries, walking dogs, chasing toddlers. I wondered how many of those women believed their husbands were faithful. How many would ever be unlucky enough to understand a second language? We pulled into our circular driveway 20 minutes later. The house rose ahead of us, all white columns and dark shutters and manicured hedges. To the neighbors, it looked like a postcard of success. Nicholas and Elena Davenport, tech billionaire and his elegant wife. To me, it suddenly looked like a beautifully furnished cage. As we walked inside, Nick's phone buzzed again. His eyes softened before he even checked the screen. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward his office. Work thing. Of course. His voice floated down the hallway a moment later, the office door not yet closed. Está bien, cariño. Sí, mañana por la noche. No te preocupes. Todo va perfecto. It's okay, darling. Yes, tomorrow night. Don't worry, everything is going perfectly. Cariño. Darling. He hadn't called me that in years. I went upstairs to our bedroom and sat on the edge of the king-size bed, staring at the colorless room. Gray walls, white bedding, chrome accents. Nick's aesthetic. Expensive, minimal, emotionally sterile. When we'd first moved in, I had suggested a soft yellow for the walls. He'd laughed and said it would make the room look like a nursery. We went with gray. My hands were shaking again. I pressed them flat against my thighs and forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. Cuando un hombre te enseña quién es, créelo la primera vez. Abuela had told me once, her dark eyes serious over a steaming cup of café con leche. When a man shows you who he is, believe him the first time. Nick had been showing me for years. The cutting comments dressed up as jokes. The joking threats about what would happen if I ever left. The way everything important had to be in his name. For tax reasons. I had refused to see it. It was easier to tell myself he was just stressed, just ambitious, just intense. That being married to a man like him meant compromise. But love doesn't sit in an empty condo and plan your replacement in another language. I stood and walked into my closet. Rows of carefully curated clothing stared back at me. Neutrals, pencil skirts, silk blouses in safe tones. The kind of wardrobe that looked good on the arm of a billionaire at a charity gala and disappeared into the background in every photo. I reached into the back and pulled out a blouse I hadn't worn in years. Emerald green, soft, with tiny covered buttons down the front. I had bought it with my own money before we married. I'd worn it once. Nick had looked me up and down and said, "You look like you're trying too hard to be noticed." I'd never put it on again. I'd shoved it to the back of the closet instead of asking myself why he was so bothered by my being visible. Holding the blouse against me in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because of the clothing, but because for the first time in a long time, there was something fierce in her eyes. Downstairs, I heard Nick laugh, his voice still drifting from the office. Warm, relaxed, happy, for her. I hung the blouse back up. Not yet, not today. Then, moving quietly, I padded down the hallway toward his office and stopped just before the door. It was almost closed, not quite. Nick never locked it. It had never occurred to him that I might have anything to hide or anything I wanted to find. No, Ella no sospecha nada, he was saying in English now. She's completely clueless. By the time she figures out what's happening, everything will be locked down. Silence as the other person spoke. Yeah, 2 weeks and we're free, Nick continued. The trust modification is airtight. My lawyer says it's all perfectly legal. Once I sign, everything moves into the new structure. She'll get whatever the court requires. but it'll be nothing compared to what I'm protecting. And with the prenup, she doesn't have much leverage anyway. Prenup. I remembered sitting in a conference room 19 years earlier, pen in hand, while his attorney, our attorney, Nick had called him, explained pages of legal language that sounded like a foreign dialect. Nick had squeezed my knee and said, "It's just standard, baby. Protects both of us. You trust me, right?" I'd signed. "Okay, love you too," Nick said now, voice dropping into a softness I hadn't heard in years. "We'll be together soon." "Love you too." Words he hadn't said to me in at least 3. I jerked back from the door, heart pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. I walked quickly to the kitchen, grabbed a cutting board and yanked vegetables from the fridge. By the time he emerged 10 minutes later, loosening his tie, I looked like I always did at 6 p.m. Domestic, busy, harmless. "Smells good," he said casually. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken and vegetables," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Perfect. I've got a few emails to send first. Call me when it's ready." He kissed the top of my head without really looking at me and disappeared again. I set the knife down and leaned against the counter. My legs felt hollow, like they might give out. Think, Elena. Fear wanted me to curl up on the kitchen floor and sob until it all disappeared. But another part of me, the part that had listened carefully in Abuela's kitchen and translated Spanish soap operas for fun, was already making a list. I needed proof. I needed money. I needed a way out. After dinner, while Nick watched the news and scrolled through his phone, I smiled and said I was going to take a bath. I ran the water loud enough to be heard, then slipped down the hall to his office on bare feet. The door opened with its usual soft click. His world was in here. Shelves of leather-bound deal books, a massive desk, carefully arranged awards, and file cabinets. I went to the nearest cabinet and pulled a drawer open, just enough to read the labels. Trust documents, investments, properties, legal. My hands trembled as I slid folders out one by one and placed them on the desk. I worked fast, the way you do when you know the bomb has already been armed and you're just trying to cut wires before it goes off. I didn't understand every clause, but I understood enough. Statements showing accounts I had never heard of, property titles in Nevada, in Florida, in the Cayman Islands, letters from his attorney outlining strategic restructuring of assets before the anticipated dissolution of marriage. Dissolution of marriage. Clinical and clean, like dissolving sugar in hot water. I took out my phone and began photographing everything. Every page, every signature, every smug note in the margin. Trust amendments that shifted control entirely to Nick. Drafts of divorce petitions already formatted with my name. A letter dated 6 months ago. Once the trust restatement is executed, most significant assets will be shielded as separate property. Mrs. Davenport's share can be limited to marital residence equity and nominal support as stipulated by the prenuptial agreement. 6 months. He'd been planning this for at least 6 months, smiling across breakfast, buying me diamonds on our anniversary, while quietly building a trap with my name printed neatly on top. "Elena," Nick's voice floated down the hall. "Everything okay?" I nearly dropped my phone. "Yes!" I called back, forcing my voice into that light, sweet register he liked. "Just letting the tub fill." "Okay." His footsteps faded again. I photographed the last set of documents with shaking hands, slid the folders back exactly where I'd found them, and closed the cabinet. Then I rushed down the hall to the bathroom, turned off the water, and sat on the closed toilet lid, heart hammering. On my phone, a gallery of images stared back at me. Every one of them a piece of the story he would tell a court if I did nothing. Every one of them a weapon if I chose to fight. Abuela's voice rose again from memory, firm and clear. "Las mujeres fuertes no esperan a ser rescatadas, mija. Ellas se salvan solas. Strong women don't wait to be rescued. They save themselves." I opened a cloud account Nick didn't know existed and began uploading the photos. Then I created a new email, sent them to an old college address I hadn't used in years, and deleted every trace from my phone's main gallery. By the time I finally slid into the lukewarm bath, my body felt like it belonged to someone else. But beneath the exhaustion, something glowed. Small, stubborn, bright. I had evidence. Tomorrow I would find a lawyer. Tomorrow I would email the firm in San Antonio that handled my grandmother's trust. the one Nick had waved off years ago as barely enough for a vacation. Tomorrow, the Elena he thought he knew would start to disappear, not into nothingness, but into someone he had never expected me to become. His naive, silent wife had exactly 2 weeks before her billionaire husband tried to erase her. He didn't know that those same 2 weeks were now my countdown too, to freedom. I woke up the next morning before Nick's alarm, staring at the ceiling while his slow, even breathing filled the dark. The man planning to erase me slept like a baby. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs. The kitchen felt too big, too polished for what I needed to do. Survive. While the coffee machine hummed to life, I opened my laptop at the island and pulled up a search bar. My fingers hovered over the keys for a second. Once I typed the words, there would be no going back. Divorce attorney financial infidelity, I typed. Then high net worth divorce wife rights. Hundreds of results appeared. I skimmed, my heart pounding. Words like asset concealment, trust restructuring, community property, prenup enforceability. I understood enough to know Nick wasn't just contemplating divorce. He was engineering my financial extinction. One name kept popping up. Monica Hale, a family law attorney with a reputation for taking on difficult spouses and complex financial cases. The photo on her website showed a woman in her 50s with dark curls, serious eyes, and a faint smile that said, "I have seen worse. Protecting your future." When your partner won't, the tagline read. I clicked the contact form and typed, "My name is Elena Davenport. I believe my husband is moving assets and preparing to file for divorce without my knowledge. I have documentation. I need to understand my rights as soon as possible." I stared at the message, then added one more line. "I can pay your consultation fee." I hit send before fear could talk me out of it. Next, money. My gaze drifted toward the far wall, where a framed black and white photo of my grandmother hung, a young Lucia in a floral dress, chin lifted, eyes defiant. When she died 8 years ago, she had left me a small trust fund. Nick had shrugged when I told him. "That's sweet," he'd said. "Probably a nice vacation for us someday." He never asked how much. I pulled up my email and searched Reyes Family Trust. An old message popped up from a law firm in San Antonio, almost a decade old, explaining that I was the sole beneficiary of a trust established before my marriage. Instructions, account numbers, a contact name who had long since retired. But there was also a generic office email at the bottom. I began typing. "Dear Sir or Madam, my name is Elena Davenport, formerly Elena Reyes. My grandmother, Lucia Reyes, established a trust in my name approximately 12 years ago. I need to confirm the current balance and discuss my options for accessing it." Urgency flooded each keystroke. "This matter is time sensitive. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." I signed it, sent it, and almost immediately felt my shoulders drop half an inch. I wasn't safe, not yet. But there were cracks in the prison now. Upstairs, the shower started, Nick's morning ritual. I closed the laptop and poured coffee for both of us, just as I always did. By the time he came down in his gray suit, I had my pleasant wife mask firmly in place. "Morning," he said, kissing my cheek. "Sleep okay?" "Fine," I lied. "Big day," he added. "Call later. We might have a dinner thing." "Of course." Kujonam. He took his black coffee, grabbed his briefcase, and left. The front door closed behind him with its usual soft click. For the first time in 15 years, I locked it from the inside and leaned against it, breathing. My phone buzzed 30 minutes later. An unknown number from Texas. "Hello, Mrs. Davenport," a warm male voice. "This is Jerome Walker from Walker & Sons Trust Services. We administer the Reyes Family Trust. You emailed this morning." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Yes, thank you for calling so quickly. I remember your grandmother," he said. "Lucia was formidable." I could hear the smile in his voice. "She was very specific about the conditions of your trust." "Specific how?" "That it would remain in your name alone, that no spouse or partner would have access, and that we were to remind you of that if you ever called sounding distressed." I laughed unexpectedly, a wet, shaky sound. "She really said that?" "She did, more than once." He paused. "Are you safe, Mrs. Davenport?" "For now," I said honestly, but I don't think I will be if I stay where I am. Understood. The current balance of your trust is approximately $182,000. I blinked. 182? Yes. Nick had called it a small vacation fund. Had he never bothered to ask? Or had he asked and dismissed it anyway because it wasn't his money? That money is yours alone, Jerome continued. It predates your marriage. In most jurisdictions, it's considered separate property. Your husband has no legal claim to it. I closed my eyes. Can I move it? Of course, if you open a bank account in your sole name, I can transfer the full amount. Are you ready for that? Yes, I said, stronger this time. I need all of it. Your grandmother would be proud, he replied quietly. She set this up to give you options. After we hung up, I didn't cry. I felt like I should, but there was too much to do. I grabbed my keys, drove across town to a bank Nick did not use, and opened an account under my maiden name. The clerk didn't ask why my hands were shaking when I signed. By noon, I'd sent Jerome the new account information through the secure portal he set up, and he'd confirmed the transfer would be completed within 3 business days. Money, lawyer, evidence. I was building a skeleton of an escape. Now I needed flesh. 2 hours later, an email came from Monica Hale's office. Dear Mrs. Davenport, this is Erin, assistant to Ms. Hale. She has an opening tomorrow at 3 p.m. for an initial consultation, if you're available. I replied so fast my fingers blurred. Yes, I'll be there. That evening, Nick came home at 9, smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't own. Client dinner, he said, kissing the air near my cheek. You know how those go. I smiled and served him reheated chicken. Inside, I was counting down. 2 weeks, he'd told his girlfriend. I was going to make sure they weren't his weeks. They were mine. The next day, I walked into a glass office tower downtown, rode the elevator to the 12th floor, and stepped into a reception area lined with law books and potted plants. Mrs. Davenport, the receptionist asked, Ms. Hale will see you now. Monica's office was bright and orderly. Diplomas on the wall, a framed print that read, Justice is what love looks like in public. She shook my hand firmly. Elena, she said, have a seat. Tell me what's going on. I took a breath and told her everything. The condo, the Spanish, the trust documents, the prenup, the other woman. My voice only cracked once. Monica took notes, then set down her pen. First, she said, I'm glad you reached out now, not after you signed anything else. Second, what your husband is doing is classic financial infidelity. Third, you have more leverage than you think. Do I? My voice sounded small even to me. She nodded. You've been married 15 years. The bulk of his wealth was built during that time, correct? Yes. When we met, he was successful, but not billionaire successful. That came after the second app launch. Then most of what you own is marital property, regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. Any attempt to move or hide assets right before a divorce can be challenged. She leaned forward. We need to move fast. Ideally, we file before he does. We request temporary orders, freezing assets, preventing transfers. Do you have somewhere you could go if you left the house? The question slammed into my chest. I had been so focused on money and legalities, I hadn't really pictured my body leaving that giant, cold house. I could get an apartment, I said, and I have a friend I could call, someone I haven't seen in years because he didn't like her. Call her, Monica said. You'll need support. This won't be easy. She slid a notepad toward me. Here's what I need from you. Copies of everything you photographed, your prenup, any account statements you can access from shared devices, your marriage certificate. I'll start drafting a petition today. When would we file? In about a week, she said. That gives you time to secure alternative housing and move essentials out quietly. When he's served, I want you physically elsewhere, with people around you. My throat tightened. He's never hit me, but he gets cruel. When he feels disrespected. That's still dangerous, Monica said calmly. Control doesn't have to come with bruises. We'll get a temporary restraining order if we have to. I want you safe. I left her office with a folder full of instructions and a head buzzing loud enough to drown out my fear. In the car, I opened social media for the first time in weeks and searched for a name I hadn't said aloud in years, Naomi Clark. Naomi had been my closest friend in college. Loud, funny, impossible not to love. Nick had never liked her. Too negative, he'd said, always stirring things up, which meant she saw him clearly. Her profile popped up, Naomi with a messy bun and a coffee, captioned, "I run on caffeine," in righteous anger. There was a message button. My fingers hovered, then started typing. "Naomi, it's Elena. I know it's been forever. I could really use a friend," she replied 11 minutes later. "Are you okay?" I stared at the blinking cursor. "Not really. Coffee? Today." "Name the place." I typed the address of a cafe near an apartment complex I'd bookmarked when I was supposed to be choosing tiles last month. 2 hours later, Naomi barreled into the cafe, all bright eyes and energy. "Oh my God," she said, pulling me into a hug before I could stand. "Look at you. You look—" She leaned back, scanned my beige dress, my careful hair. "Like you've been held hostage by a lifestyle blog." I burst out laughing. It tipped over too quickly into tears. "Oh, honey," she whispered, squeezing my shoulder. "Tell me everything." So I did. By the time I finished, her expression had shifted from horror to icy focus. "He's planning to leave you broke," she said, "and humiliated. Classic rich guy move." "I have a lawyer now," I said, "and a trust from Abuela, and I'm looking at apartments." "Good," Naomi said. "What do you need from me?" "Help." The word felt heavy on my tongue. I was not used to asking for it. "I need help moving," I admitted, "and someone to be with me when he finds out." "Done," she said instantly. "I'll take off work if I have to. You're not doing any of this alone." The next day I toured a small one-bedroom in a quiet building across town. White walls, narrow kitchen, a big east-facing window that flooded the living room with morning light. "It's available immediately," the property manager, a woman my age named Dana, told me. "First and last month's rent, plus deposit." Can I think about it?" my old self wanted to ask. But the new voice inside me, the one that had been studying Spanish and survival in Abuela's kitchen, said something else. "I'll take it," I replied. She smiled. "Congratulations on your new home." New home. The words swept through me like warm wind. 2 days later, Jerome confirmed the trust fund's transfer had completed. The numbers on my private account screen made my chest ache with a strange combination of grief and gratitude. "Gracias, abuela," I whispered to my phone. "Me diste una puerta de salida." You gave me an exit door. That evening, Nick came home earlier than usual, papers in hand. "Good, you're here," he said, placing a thick envelope on the kitchen island. "I need you to sign these by tomorrow. Just updates to the trust. Estate planning stuff." My blood went cold. "What kind of updates?" "Nothing major," he said, already moving toward the bar cart. "Language changes, technical stuff. Our lawyer recommended it." Our lawyer? The man who had written letters about dissolving my marriage like a business contract? "I'd like to read them," I said carefully. He laughed. "You'll fall asleep halfway through the first page. Just sign where I flagged it. It's fine, Elle." "I still want to read them," I repeated. "And have someone explain them to me." He stopped pouring his drink, turned. "Someone?" "A lawyer," I said. "My lawyer." The silence stretched for 3 dangerous seconds. "You got a lawyer?" he asked. His tone was light, but his jaw had gone hard. "Yes," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "I realized how much paperwork I've signed without understanding. I don't want to do that anymore." "You don't trust me?" He stepped closer. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. "It's not about trust," I said. "It's about understanding what I'm signing." His eyes flashed. "You sound like Naomi," he muttered. "Or your grandmother. Always suspicious, always dramatic." I swallowed. "I'm just asking for time to have someone explain it. If it's as simple as you say, there's no problem." His fingers drummed once on the counter. "Fine," he said at last. "But I need this signed by next week. Timing matters." "I understand him," I replied. He grabbed the papers and stalked toward his office. The door closed harder than usual. Not quite a slam, but close enough. My heart was racing, but beneath the adrenaline was a thin, surprising layer of pride. For the first time in years, I had told him no. Friday morning, while Nick was at the office, I drove to Dana's building and signed the lease. She handed me 2 keys and a small smile. "Welcome home, Elena." I stood alone in that empty apartment, sunlight warming the hardwood floor, and let myself feel it this time. Fear, yes, but also Possibility. I took out my phone and called Monica. I'm ready, I said. File the petition. Serve him at his office. I'll be out before then. Good, she said. You're doing the right thing. That weekend, I told Nick I was going to stay with Naomi for a few days. Girl time, I said lightly. We haven't seen each other in so long. He barely looked up from his laptop. Fine. I'll be busy anyway. Lots of late nights this week. I packed carefully. Clothes that could pass as a quick overnight and boxes of things that would not be missed immediately. Old photo albums. A few favorite books. The framed picture of Abuela. Naomi met me around the corner with her SUV. Okay, she said, popping the trunk. Let's get you out of this prison. We moved loads back and forth all weekend. Every time we closed the door on my new apartment, full of boxes and mismatched dishes and a cheap mattress on the floor, I felt more solid. By Sunday night, I had enough to live on if I never stepped into that big house again. On Monday, Monica filed the divorce petition. On Wednesday at 1 p.m., the process server would walk into Nick's office with a neat stack of papers that said very clearly, no. I woke up on Wednesday morning not in a mansion, but on a cheap mattress in a small room that smelled faintly of new paint and coffee. Sunlight streamed in. For the first time in a long time, my first waking thought wasn't, what does he need from me today? It was, what do I need from me today? At 12:55 p.m., I sat on my new living room floor with Naomi, and my phone turned face down on the coffee table. 5 minutes, she said, watching the wall clock. How do you feel? Like I'm about to throw up, I admitted. And also like I just stepped off a cliff and remembered halfway down that I might have wings. She grinned. You definitely have wings. At 1:20, my phone rang with Monica's office number. I put it on speaker. It's done, Monica said. He's been served. His attorney called within 5 minutes. He is not pleased, Naomi snorted. Good. Anabri, what do I do now? I asked. Now, Monica said. You don't answer his calls. You forward any email or messages to me. You stay put, and you start learning what your life looks like when you're not orbiting around him. After we hung up, I turned my phone over. 12 missed calls, 7 new texts, 2 voicemails. I didn't open any of them. I selected all, hit forward to Monica's email, and then blocked his number. Naomi exhaled like she'd been holding her breath too. You did it, she said. You actually did it. I leaned my head back against the wall and let my eyes close. Tears slid down my cheeks quietly, not from sadness exactly, but from the sheer release of it all. My billionaire husband didn't know I spoke Spanish, I whispered. He didn't know I could hear every word while he planned to erase me. Naomi nudged my shoulder. And now? Now, I said, opening my eyes to the bare walls of my small, safe apartment. He's the one who doesn't know what's coming. Because for the first time in 15 years, Nicholas Davenport had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought he'd married silence. He was about to meet the woman who had finally learned to speak. The first night alone in my apartment was strangely quiet. No distant murmur of business news from the living room. No soft ping of Nick's phone. No footsteps pacing his office while he yelled at someone in another time zone. Just the hum of the fridge, the distant sound of traffic, and the creak of the building settling around me. I lay on my cheap mattress and stared at the ceiling, feeling each second roll by like a wave. Fear kept trying to slide in. What if this was a mistake? What if he crushed me in court? What if I ended up with nothing? But another thought kept answering, steady and stubborn. You already had nothing. Money, yes. House, yes. Status, absolutely. But no autonomy, no voice, no life that belonged to me. In the morning, sunlight spilled in through the bare windows. There was no second pillow beside me, no schedule dictated by Nick's needs. Just a small square of light on the wall and an entire day I could shape myself. I made coffee on my tiny stove and opened my laptop. Monica had already emailed, "Good morning, Elena. His attorney has been in touch. They're pushing for an early settlement and insisting you're overreacting. We're not rushing. We'll respond on our timeline. Today, I'd like you to focus on gathering any additional financial records you can access online, and, if you have the bandwidth, thinking about what you want your life to look like after this." She had added a smiley face. Lawyers who used emojis oddly comforted me. I spent the morning logging into joint accounts, downloading statements, and sending everything to Monica. Shared credit cards, mortgage accounts, stock portfolios I hadn't realized we owned. Each PDF was another piece of the puzzle Nick had assumed I was too stupid or disinterested to understand. Around noon, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. Without thinking too hard, I opened a new browser tab and typed, Community College Business Course Evening. A local campus popped up just 10 minutes from my new apartment. They offered part-time classes. One caught my eye. Introduction to Small Business Basics. Description: a course for adults starting over, changing careers, or exploring entrepreneurship. Starting over. I clicked Enroll. The payment screen appeared, and for the first time in years, I paid for something without asking anyone's permission. The next few days developed a small rhythm. Mornings, paperwork, emails with Monica, calls with Jerome confirming that my grandmother's trust transfer was complete. Afternoons, trips to discount furniture stores with Naomi, picking out basic pieces for the apartment. Sitting on the floor eating takeout, laughing about the fact that I had no idea how to assemble a bookshelf because Nick had always hired someone for things like that. Welcome to IKEA adulthood, Naomi joked, handing me an Allen key like it was a ceremonial sword. Evenings, walking the neighborhood, memorizing the way the light changed on the buildings, the tiny restaurants, the laundromat on the corner. Coming home to silence that was mine, not imposed. On Monday, my first business class met in a fluorescent-lit room on the second floor of an old brick building. I walked in clutching a notebook like it was a shield. The instructor, Professor Rachel Kim, was a short woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a quicker smile. Business ownership isn't just about numbers, she said after we introduced ourselves. It's about choice. It's about building something that belongs to you. Many of you are here because life forced you to pivot. That's scary, but it's also your advantage. You've already survived things you thought would break you. I sat there frozen. She couldn't possibly know my story, but it felt like she was speaking directly to me. After class, a man around my age approached me as we packed up. Hey, he said, I'm Theo. First day nerves hit you too? I smiled. Completely, I'm Elena. What made you sign up? He asked as we walked toward the parking lot. I'm starting over, I said, figuring out what I can do besides be someone's wife. He nodded like he understood that more deeply than he said. I got laid off from a sales job after 20 years, starting a consulting thing, but I don't know the first thing about actually running a business. So, here we are. We traded numbers for study group emergencies, he joked, and I drove home feeling like a tiny piece of myself I'd lost years ago. Curiosity had just flickered back to life. Meanwhile, Nick was not handling the loss of control well. Monica sent me summaries of his lawyer's communications. He insists there was no intent to hide assets. He claims you're overly emotional. He wants a quick settlement with minimal disruption to his business interests. What do you want? She asked me over the phone one afternoon. I stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. For 15 years, I hadn't asked myself that question in any serious way. I want enough, I said slowly. Enough to not be afraid. Enough to not have to go back. Legally speaking, she said, you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. We'll use that as our starting point. His side's first offer came the next week. 25% of marital assets, no spousal support, and the house if I wanted it. I almost laughed. The house that felt like a museum, the house whose keys I'd left on the counter. Hard no, Monica said crisply. They're testing how desperate you are. We're countering at 50% plus support. We may not get everything, but we won't start from crumbs. In between drafts of settlement proposals and asset lists, life began to spread into the empty corners of my days. Naomi, who ran a small but growing marketing agency, called me one afternoon. Remember how you used to rearrange our dorm room every 2 weeks? She asked. I laughed. Yeah, you called it my furniture therapy. Well, one of my clients just signed a new office lease, and the place looks like a high-end dentist's waiting room. They want it to feel more modern, more them. I thought of you. You always had an eye for spaces. Want to help? I hesitated. Naomi, I've never done that professionally. I didn't even finish my design program. Then everything became about Nick. So now it can be about you again, she said simply. They'll pay. We need a design brain. Worst case, you try it and hate it. Best case, you find out you're really good at something that's not protecting a man's ego. It was a small office, 3 rooms in a conference area, but the first time I walked through it with the owners, something clicked. What do you want people to feel when they walk in? I asked. They looked at each other. Like we're creative but reliable, one of them said. Not like we sell insurance. I went home and sketched late into the night at my tiny kitchen table. Warm wood here, a deep blue accent wall instead of gray, plants to soften the corners, artwork from local artists instead of generic prints. When I presented the concept board to them, my hands shook. This, the owner said, tapping the board, this is exactly it. The project took 3 weeks. I managed deliveries, painted walls myself, assembled furniture, and learned to negotiate with stubborn electricians without apologizing for existing. Standing in the finished space, watching the owners spin slowly in their new office chairs, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Naomi slid an envelope into my hand. Your fee, she said. We'll be calling you again. And I'm telling everyone I know that you're a designer now. So get ready. Designer. The word fluttered in my chest, unsure of where to land. At the same time, things on the legal front were heating up. Nick's team pushed for a private mediation rather than going straight to court. He doesn't want public filings revealing his restructuring, Monica said with a pointed look. That's our leverage. The morning of mediation, I dressed carefully, not in beige, in my emerald blouse, the one Nick had hated, and dark pants. I pulled my hair into a loose, low bun, the way Abuela used to wear hers. The conference room was neutral territory. Nick sat on one side with his attorney, a man whose suit probably cost more than my monthly rent. I sat on the other with Monica, who looked calm enough to be at a brunch. A mediator perched at the head of the table like a referee. Nick looked older than I remembered, angrier. There were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. He glanced at my blouse and blinked. For a brief second, I saw confusion flicker in his eyes. I had never worn that color in his presence. The mediator explained the process. Offers would go back and forth. We could break into separate rooms. The goal was to reach an agreement without going to trial. His first offer, through his attorney, was 30% of marital assets and a generous lump sum in lieu of spousal support. Monica didn't even look at me before saying, declined. Hours passed, numbers shifted. There were breaks where Monica and I sat in a smaller room, and she translated legalese into plain language. At 40%, we're getting close to what a judge might award, she said at one point. But given his attempted asset concealment, we can push. When we returned to the main room, Nick was pacing by the window, jaw tight. He sat when we entered but didn't meet my eyes. His lawyer's next proposal, 45% of marital assets, 2 years of spousal support, plus my share of retirement accounts. I could choose a cash buyout instead of any interest in the house. Monica leaned toward me. This is fair, she murmured, and it spares you the stress of a trial. But the decision is yours. I looked at Nick for the first time that day. Once upon a time, that face had made my heart race. The charming grin, the bright eyes that promised the world. Now all I saw was a man who believed he could move me around like a piece on his chessboard. I thought about 2 years of my life that had gone into helping him host investors, manage his schedule, soothe his ego behind the scenes. 2 decades of slowly becoming smaller so he could become larger. And I thought about the office I just redesigned, the business class where Professor Kim had said, the hardest part is believing you're allowed to want things. I agree to those terms, I said, my voice steady. The mediator nodded, relief passing across her face. Then let's formalize this. We signed, page after page, my name next to his, not as a wife, but as a counterparty. It was done. Walking out of that building into the late afternoon light, I felt strange, lighter and heavier at the same time. Monica squeezed my shoulder. You did well, she said. You stood your ground. You're going to be okay. When I got back to my apartment, Naomi was waiting with a grocery bag and a bottle of cheap champagne. So, she demanded before I even shut the door. We settled, I said. 45%. Support, No house. She let out a whoop that probably shook the building. We don't want the mausoleum anyway. That's his monument to himself. We ate pasta off mismatched plates, sitting on my second-hand couch, and toasted to the weird, wild future. To Elena, Naomi said, raising her glass, who walked out of a gilded cage and into her own life. I laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere new. And later that night, lying alone in my small bedroom, I whispered into the dark, Te escuché, Nick. I heard every word. You tried to rewrite the story without me, but you forgot. I know the whole language. Not just Spanish, the language of being underestimated, the language of women who learn, too late or just in time, that they are allowed to choose themselves. If someone had told me 2 years earlier that I would one day unlock the glass door of an office with my own name on it, I would have smiled politely and mentally filed them under delusional optimists. But on a bright Tuesday morning, that's exactly what I did. The frosted panel read, Collins and Reyes Design Studio. I'd reclaimed my maiden name and woven it into the business title. Part me now, part the girl I'd been before Nick. On the wall inside, framed photos showed spaces we'd transformed. A cozy coffee shop, a boutique hotel lobby, an airy law firm, a handful of apartments that looked like magazine spreads but were built on real budgets. We're out of paint samples, Sophie called from the back, emerging with her arms full of fabric swatches. She'd been my first hire, a recent design school grad with sharp bangs and sharper instincts. And the Martinez restaurant wants to move up their deadline, because of course they do. Of course, I said, smiling. Call them back. We can adjust, but not at the cost of our sanity. Boundaries, remember? She grinned. I'm still getting used to that concept. You're a good bad influence. Emails pinged. The phone rang. Our shared calendar was full of client meetings and site visits. It was chaotic and exhausting, and exactly what I had once believed I didn't deserve. At lunch, I sat alone at my desk for a moment, flipping open a worn notebook. It wasn't mine. It was my grandmother's. One of the journals Jerome had mailed me after finding them in an old storage box. I had spent nights reading her stories, crossing the border with 2 small children and a suitcase, cleaning houses for women who pretended not to see her, saving a few dollars from every paycheck to build the trust that had saved me. One entry, written years before she died, was underlined 3 times. Mi Elena tiene una luz grande, she wrote. My Elena has a big light, pero su esposo no la ve. Tengo miedo de que se apague si se queda. So I leave her what I can. Dinero, sí, pero también palabras. Money, yes, but also words. Para que un día recuerde que puede irse. So that one day she remembers she can leave. I closed the notebook and pressed my hand over it for a second. She had given me money, but more importantly, she had given me a language for my own worth. My phone buzzed with a new email. Subject, referral from Professor Kim. A woman named Carol wrote, Hi, Elena. I heard you speak at the small business conference and your story sounded familiar. I left a controlling marriage 6 months ago. I'm starting my own bookkeeping business out of a 1-bedroom, and my place still feels like his. I can't afford a full redesign, but I wondered if you had any advice. Thank you for sharing your story. It made me feel less alone. Carol. I stared at the message for a long moment. 2 years ago, I had been the one sending shaky emails to strangers, hoping someone would know what to do with my fear. I replied, Hi, Carol. First, you're not alone. Second, yes, I have advice. Third, I also have an idea. Let's meet for coffee. My treat. The next week, we sat across from each other in a cafe that had become my unofficial second office. Carol was mid-40s with tired eyes and a careful way of taking up space, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. You're further along than you think, I told her after she described her situation. You left. That's the hardest step. It doesn't feel like I'm brave, she said softly. I cry over curtain rods and electric bills. He handled everything. I feel stupid half the time. You're not stupid, I said. You're just learning a new language. The language of running your own life. It feels awkward at first, like rolling your R's when you didn't grow up doing it. But it comes. She smiled at that faintly. I guess you would know about languages. I laughed. Yeah, my billionaire ex-husband didn't know I spoke Spanish. He also didn't realize I would ever speak up. Both turned out to be his biggest miscalculations. We spent an hour sketching simple changes for her apartment, moving her desk near the window, painting one wall a color she loved, hanging shelves for her business materials instead of keeping them in boxes on the floor. "I can't pay you," she said as we stood to leave. "This one is on me," I replied. "Call it professional karma. When you're thriving and someone comes to you scared, you'll do the same." On my way back to the studio, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from Theo. "Study group reunion tonight?" he wrote. "Angela's bringing cupcakes, and I still don't understand advanced cash flow, so I feel morally obligated to keep meeting." I chuckled. Business class had ended months ago, but our little group had stuck. Angela had opened her bakery. Theo's consulting business was gradually gaining clients. I typed back, "I'll be there. Someone has to keep you from launching a marketing campaign in Comic Sans." Life had become crowded in the best ways. Even my romantic life, something I'd sworn to ignore forever, had cautiously unfolded. I met Daniel at a networking event for small business owners. He ran a dog walking company that had somehow grown into a logistics operation with employees and an app. The first time he asked me out, I had said no. The second time I said, "Coffee, not dinner. 1 hour. I leave if you make a joke about crazy exes." He didn't. He asked about my work instead. A few months later, he knew my story in broad strokes and still looked at me like I was a person, not a cautionary tale. "I don't need saving," I had told him early on. "Good," he'd said. "I'm terrible at that. How about partnership instead?" We were taking it slow. The old Elena would have poured herself into the relationship, trying to be whatever he needed. The new one kept a clear line between her life and anyone else's. One afternoon, standing on a ladder in a nearly finished hotel lobby, choosing between two light fixtures, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "This is Elena," I answered, tucking the phone between my shoulder and ear. "Hi, Ms. Davenport." "Sorry, Collins," a woman said. "My name is Julia. I'm calling on behalf of a client who'd like to hire you for a condo project. You came highly recommended by a realtor named Camilla." I almost dropped the fixture. Camilla, the realtor from that day. "Your work for some of her clients impressed her," Julia continued. "Would you be open to a new consultation?" I swallowed. "Of course. What's the client's name?" There was a brief pause. "Jennifer Miles." Recognition flickered. That was the name I had seen once on Nick's phone, half hidden, back when I still pretended not to notice. The other one. For a moment, old emotions surged: hurt, humiliation, anger. Then they receded under a quiet, surprising clarity. All she knew of me, if anything, was that I was a designer who came highly recommended. To her, I wasn't the discarded wife of the man she loved. I was a professional who might help her create a home. And me? I was no longer the woman waiting in the wings while someone else made all the decisions. "Yes," I said. "I can meet with her. Send me the details." The condo wasn't the same one I'd walked through with Nick and Camilla, but it might as well have been its cousin. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek finishes, expensive emptiness. Jennifer was younger than me by at least 10 years. Pretty, nervous, a designer bag hanging off her shoulder like a shield. "I wanted to feel like my space," she said as I took measurements. "Not like a show unit. Warm, real. I've never had my own place before." I stepped back, looking at the bare walls, at the woman who had once been a shadow in my marriage and was now, inadvertently, my client. "We can definitely do that," I said. "Tell me what home feels like to you." We talked about colors and textures and rooms she'd loved as a child. I never mentioned Nick. She never brought him up either. When the project was complete, a soft, golden living room, a kitchen that invited late-night conversations, a bedroom that felt like a sanctuary, she stood in the middle of it all and said quietly, "I didn't know it was possible to feel like this. Like this is mine." I smiled. "It is." After she left, I sat alone on her new sofa for a moment, looking around. If life had been written by some vengeful storyteller, this would have been the place for a confrontation, for an ugly truth to spill out, for drama. But life, it turned out, was kinder and more interesting than that. I got up, took one last look around at the beautiful space that belonged to someone else, and left. I had my own life to get back to. Months blurred into more projects, more clients, more late nights at the studio. My business grew slowly and then all at once. A local magazine wrote an article about the designer who rebuilt her life and her city's spaces at the same time. Shikrum, the headline made me cringe, but the work that came in because of it allowed me to hire a third designer and move to a bigger office. One evening, after everyone had left, I stayed late at my desk going through emails. The building was quiet. Outside, the city's lights glittered like a scattered jewelry box. I opened a new message and froze at the sender. Nicholas Davenport. The subject line was simple. Regarding old times. Against my better judgment, I clicked. Elena, I saw the article about your studio. Congratulations. I've been doing some thinking about our marriage and the way things ended. I'm not asking for anything, but I'd like you to know that I regret how I handled things. I underestimated you. I'm glad you're doing well. Nick, I stared at the screen for a long moment. Once upon a time, a message like that would have sent me into a tailspin. Hope, confusion, old longing. Now I felt nothing sharp, just a distant recognition, like seeing a house you'd once lived in from the freeway. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I opened a new email. To Jerome Walker. Subject: Update. Jerome, just wanted you to know, your former client, my grandmother, was right about everything. Her trust got me out when I needed it. Her words kept me going when I wanted to go back. I've built a business. I'm happy. Please know the work you did for her changed my life. Gracias, Elena. I hit send and leaned back in my chair. The office was dark except for my desk lamp. The city outside spoke its own language of sirens and laughter and distant music. For years, I had been fluent in silence, in shrinking, in pretending not to understand. Now I was fluent in something else. In no, in enough, in yes, but only when I choose it. On the 2-year anniversary of the day I left, Naomi insisted on throwing a party at the studio. We're calling it your Freedom Day, she said, stringing fairy lights across the ceiling. Don't argue, I've already ordered a cake. Our little office filled with people, Sophie and the other designers, Professor Kim and Theo, Angela from the bakery, clients who had become friends, new friends who didn't even know what Nick looked like. At one point, Naomi tapped a glass. Speech, she yelled. I groaned. Absolutely not. Absolutely yes, she said. You're the reason we're all drinking champagne on a Thursday. I stood on a chair because there were no stages in my life anymore. Only things you climbed yourself. 2 years ago, I said, voice shaking a little, I sat on the floor of a tiny apartment with no furniture and blocked my ex-husband's number. I had no idea what I was going to do. I only knew I couldn't go back. The room quieted. I thought then that I was just escaping, that the best I could hope for was not being afraid. I didn't imagine. I gestured around us, at the mood boards on the walls, at the people, at the light. Any of this. I took a breath. So if you're here tonight and you're in the middle of your own mess, I said, if you're starting over, or thinking about it, or just trying to believe you're allowed to want a life that feels like yours, I want you to know something. You don't have to speak Spanish to save yourself. Laughter rippled through the room. You just have to believe that your story isn't over, I finished. Even when someone else has already written an ending for you, you're allowed to pick up the pen. They clapped. Naomi whooped. Someone started crying. It might have been me. Later, as the party thinned out, I stepped outside onto the sidewalk with a paper cup of sparkling water. The night was warm. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing guitar and singing in Spanish, old love songs I recognized from Abuela's kitchen. Te lo dije, mija, I could almost hear her say. I told you so. You did, I whispered back into the night. My billionaire husband hadn't known I spoke Spanish. He hadn't known that the girl at his side understood every insult, every plan, every cruel little aside. He hadn't known that while he was busy speaking about me like I was furniture, I was quietly learning another language entirely, the language of leaving, of fighting, of building, of joy. He hadn't known that the woman he'd tried to write out of his story would go on to write her own, louder, brighter, and entirely in her own voice. And that, more than any settlement or business success, was the victory I carried with me into every new room I entered, every space I transformed. Not a fairy tale ending, something better, a life in which I finally understood and could say, in two languages, that I was never disposable.